All right. Looks like I am live or have been live for 30 seconds or so. Hello, everyone. Hope everything is going well. So this is a video that I want to talk about a couple things. First, I just found out 20 minutes ago that I have been approved for the partnership program on YouTube. I think they have a pretty low bar that I probably passed a couple years ago. I just applied maybe 2 or 3 days ago, and I just got the approval. So I don't know if that's going to change anything just yet, but this was very much deliberate on my part to try and do whatever I can to mitigate the possibility of the channel getting deleted with the new policy changes that we've all seen happen. I don't depend on this channel. I don't make any money off of it. I never have. So this isn't a question of my livelihood going away or anything like that. I think if I took all the donations I've ever gotten, it was about $70. So, we're not talking about anything like that, but, I value having this venue and this dialogue. I enjoy it. It's cathartic. It's something that I just personally like, and I think it's worthwhile. So I don't want to see all my videos, the hundreds of videos, I think it's 500 or 600 at this point, to be taken down. Now, I don't know what the odds of that happening are. If I were not to join the partner program, and there's every chance that even having joined it, I'm still at risk, or maybe I wasn't at risk even if I hadn't. I don't know. But I didn't think it was going to hurt my odds, so I went ahead and did it yesterday. The other thing that I'm doing though is I am not confident in YouTube's future as a venue for this sort of dialogue, and so I have started podcasting. Now, podcasting is something that many subscribers have asked me about doing or considered said I should consider doing. I had no real qualms against it. I just didn't want to put forward the effort to set something like that up. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to try and put a link to my podcast. There's right now just one episode on there. Um, in the future, there hopefully will be more. Um, so if you're interested in that, please check that out. If you're a member of, if you like my stuff, I'm probably gonna take a lot of my old videos and put them on there with updated commentary. Seems like that will be pretty easy to do, um, and a good way to kind of rehash this content, especially if there's any chance of YouTube taking it down. So that's definitely in the works. There we go. I'm just putting the link in there right now. Awesome. Okay, that's all set. So, again, I don't know what YouTube's going to do, if they're going to do anything. Again, I'm very small fish here. The only way they're dealing with me at this point is algorithms, and I don't anticipate that really changing. But I don't want to just see everything gone. So I am going to start doing what I can to keep the channel and to diversify. So, um, yeah. So the the podcast is apparently, I'm seeing the comments, it is in the description. So right now there's just one episode on there. I will put more. Uh, I think one thing I might do is go back into my older content, watch those videos, and add commentary, and of course do new content. And I'm going to do some new content today too. This isn't just going to be an update video. Um, so that's just to let everyone know that's what's going on. And like I said, I was about to do this live stream, and I got a email from YouTube saying that I was approved for the program, which I guess wasn't too surprising since I'd met their metrics a long time ago. So I don't know if that means there's going to be ads anytime soon, or there's just be super chats or what. I have to go and look through all that. And I also have to apologize. The podcast, I just got that out as soon as I could. It's a minimal amount of effort, and I'm going to try and do more. I'll try to brush it up and whatever. But I'm not an expert at that. And one of the things is I like this as a venue to express ideas and to have a dialogue. And the thing is, anything beyond that, any kind of fancy editing or music or stuff like that, it seems like diminishing returns from my perspective. I understand that from a marketing perspective, that's foolish. That what it's a sorry state, or maybe I don't agree with it, but the fact is that people tend to like that stuff. If you make stuff that has certain um, consistent quality things, that adds a lot of appeal. And so, I'm open to that, but I'm not going to break the bank to try and create something that's high. Um, so towards a more unjust society. So that's the news. So today I wanted to talk about one of the books. My last one I talked about the books that I'd read last summer. And this one's going to be inspired by the book The Great Leveler, Violence and the History of Inequality from the Stone Age to the 21st Century by Walter Scheidel. Here we are. I believe I heard this book recommended by Jordan Peterson probably about 2 years ago. And I read it last summer and this summer. And actually, after I read it, I went to PorcFest, and there was a lecture not about this, but on a related topic. So this book is actually really pertinent to contemporary political debates, because a huge political idea or philosophy that is dealt with today is the idea of equality of outcome and redistribution. I know this isn't just a new thing. This has been going on at least since the progressive era, if not before. But this idea, uh, like, will um, it's not new, but with the work of, say, Francis Piketty and of the more radical left, this is becoming a more, I think, a stronger political idea than it has been in the immediate past. So there's this idea that wealth inequality or income inequality, and they're not the same thing, and depending on which one you're measuring, you can get wildly different answers to, who's inequality, who's unequal, and who's not. Um, Not poverty. People have enough food, if they're warm, if they're sheltered, if they're comfortable, if they are able to afford a certain degree of luxury. What's the problem if there are other people who are much wealthier than they are? And I think that's my impulse. And it's the impulse of a lot of libertarians, not necessarily just libertarians, but people. Look, you could say that you're relatively poorer than Bill Gates because you're not a billionaire, but if you have a nice life, and you certainly have a nice life by historical standards, which basically everybody does, and especially in the West or the United States, and indeed really almost everyone everywhere, even the bottom billion in the world live better than the top 10% did 150 years ago. But uh, so there's that problem, but there's some research, and there's some people who will say and allege, and it's plausible if not necessarily true, that while it doesn't matter if in absolute terms you are wealthy or have a certain degree of wealth, if there is a relative imbalance in income or poverty, then that's going to be stressful, and that's a problem. And there's two kinds of ways to look at it. I guess one of them is you're going to be upset and you're going to be sad, and they don't say this, but the truth of the matter is you're going to be jealous and envious. But then on the other hand, there's another, I think, a slightly better critique that is, well, yes, you may be jealous or envious, and or stressed out or feel diminished because you're poorer than somebody else. But the main problem is that then in a democratic government system, or for that matter, any government system, the rich are going to have a disproportionate influence over the state, and then this causes a lot of problems. Now that's kind of interesting because it's actually implicit or actually explicitly acknowledging a very real problem with states, and that is that states are susceptible, and I would say not only susceptible, but in fact almost always in the control of minority special interests. Now, who that special interest is could vary. So you could have states where that special interest is an aristocracy. It could be a religious elite. It could be a military elite, right? It could be an ethnic elite. So you could have, say, the Manchurians invading China, and they set up their. I think that they were like 1/10 of 1% of the population, or something like that, and yet they rule over the, 400 million Han Chinese. Um, you could have it be the super rich, you could have it be the super old, you could have it be the most bellicose or militaristic. So I think at the heart of it, there's kind of an interesting kernel of truth that, well, if you have a bunch of wealthy people that are vastly more wealthy than everybody else, isn't there the potential that they could have control over the state, and couldn't that be bad? And the answer to most of those questions is yes, both of those things could happen. What's not asked and then subsequently not answered is, well, what is the situation where there is no special interest, right? You can redistribute the wealth, you can try anyway to redistribute the wealth of the wealthy to make it more even, but that doesn't mean that you have eliminated the possibility of a special interest. So here we go. So there's a couple problems with this, but there's another problem. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that uh, wealth disparity or income disparity is actually a problem. And that even if you're doing materially well, if other people are doing significantly better than you, and there's a whole other non-trivial question of how much of a difference does it make? If your neighbor makes 50% more than you, does that mean that we need to, rip off half of his stuff or whatever, enough of his stuff to make you equal? Does there have to be absolute equality, or can there be a certain degree of inequality, and what degree is that? And how much of a cost are we willing to impose to achieve that? Let's say that, well, we need to redistribute 50% of the wealth from the top, say 10% to the bottom, 45% or whatever it comes out to be. But the cost of doing that is going to destroy, half the wealth that exists. Is that worth doing? And that's a question that a lot of these people haven't asked. But what the Great Leveler looks at is like, well, what things actually do reduce inequality the best? And he goes through, and I'll give you just a brief overview. So the chapter titles, and the first chapters are like a brief history of inequality. But then when he starts getting to things that actually reduce inequality, he has war, revolution, and he specifies communism, collapse, plague, and famine. So that just gives you some basic idea. These are the things that are the most effective means of reducing inequality. And the best example that we have, and the one he talks the most about, is the Black Death in Europe in the mid-14th century. This was a demographic catastrophe that wiped out, estimates vary anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of the population of Europe, and it did vary in place to place. And what we saw in the aftermath of that was a great, quote, leveling. The value of labor increased tremendously. Anyone who happened to survive suddenly became more valuable. An enormous amount of wealth was destroyed. Fields left fallow, estates run amok, businesses destroyed, towns, commercial networks annihilated, loans obviously weren't repaid, right? If you made loans to somebody who died of the plague, you probably didn't get your loan back. And the result was that the wealthy lost a lot of their wealth relative to the poor. And this is something that's actually pretty well acknowledged. I remember even learning in college that people said, well, yes, the Black Death was bad, but wages went up. And, I remember some of my co-students, said, well, it wasn't all bad, wages went up. I'm like, you're talking about 1/3 of the people around you dying horribly. And I guess it's fine to say that maybe there was a silver lining, but then to say that the net effect was good is totally another thing. And it's not necessarily what the students I heard were saying. So he talks about famine being another one, but he goes into all the history of the Antonine plagues, the Roman plagues, the plagues among the Native Americans. That basically this was very leveling. Now people will say things like revolution. What if you have a radically egalitarian state? And this is true. Communism does create some equality, especially if it's extremely violent and destructive. So the Chinese, Cambodian, and Stalinist model. But the way that they do it is not by a progressive taxation where they take wealth from the wealthy and then distribute it, and now we get a leveling or an equaling. What they do is destroy wealth destroy a huge amount of wealth. Most of that destruction happens to people who are wealthy. Everybody becomes poor. The poor become poorer. The middle class become poorer. But the rich become much more poorer, relatively speaking. So if you look in Russia, and a really good kind of history on this on the side is Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development, Volume 1 by Anthony C. Sutton. That's a tremendous book. And you read about how after the Bolsheviks came to power, Many capitalists, if you owned any kind of factory, if you owned any kind of land, if you were any kind of wealthy landowner or successful business person, you needed to leave. You needed to flee the country, and most of them did. And if they didn't, they were killed. And their factory, their property, their capital, the stuff that made them wealthy was either destroyed by them, destroyed by the communists deliberately, or was destroyed by neglect or lack of use. They had a term that the Soviets used where they would confiscate these factories that they did not really know how to run. Right, the owners had left. Most of the skilled workers had either fled or had been killed in the course of the war, and they'd had no real way to operate these factories. So, for instance, there were automobile factories in St. Petersburg and other parts of Russia. Right? They had a nascent automobile industry, just as they had a nascent aircraft industry, actually. And the technical expertise and the entrepreneurial skill to make those things function was obliterated by the revolution, either because the people were themselves obliterated or because they fled. So the communists would take control of these factories and, quote, put them into um, technical storage or technical, they would just kind of keep them. But you can't just let them sit there and expect them to still be valuable and to still work. Became dilapidated, and 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years later, when they started to try and reutilize them, if they weren't completely destroyed, the methods in that industry would have changed, technology would have changed, and they would have become vastly less valuable than they were in 1914 or 1917. So, and the other example would be China, mass starvation, mass destruction, mass confiscation. So yes, they did become more equal, but the only way that they could achieve this was through basically mass murder and mass confiscation, mass destruction. So it wasn't that everyone just became more equal. Everyone became more equal, and everyone became poorer. And this is a famous little quib that Margaret Thatcher had in Parliament, where she said, "You don't want everyone to be richer. You want everyone to be poor as long as the rich become more poor." And I don't know. This is apparently the only government thing, the only program that a government can do that can achieve this. Now, obviously, plagues can do it, famines can do it, floods, hurricanes. These are all things that could contribute to this. But in terms of a policy, these are pretty much the only things that will work. Progressive taxation has very marginal effects because it's not radical. It's not imposed as overtly and coercively. And so capital finds ways to flow around it. Rich people find ways to avoid it. If something's going to be taxed, then they simply don't produce as much there, or they move it into tax havens. You need to be much more bloodthirsty and fascistic if you're going to wring them for what they're worth. And so that doesn't really work. Uh, see. So yeah, the idea that there, and I think well, people could say, well, maybe we just haven't found the right policy, right? Like Mao hasn't done it right, and Lenin didn't do it right. And this is the thing. I mean, these people are advocating we need equality, and it's like, are you willing to go to that level? And this is what I asked when I went to PorcFest. They had a guy from the Institute of Economic Research, I believe, who was doing basically a critique of Piketty. And I brought up this book in my question, and I said, do these people like Piketty and these other leftists who are pushing this all the time, are they aware that apparently historically the only way to achieve any kind of substantive redistribution is with extremely violent and destructive policies? And he said most of them apparently aren't aware of this, and the few that are kind of just hoping that it won't be that way, that it'll be some other way to do it. And some of them are probably true Jacobins. Some of them probably are like, yes, burn the rich, kill the rich, uh, break out the pitchforks, let's make this happen. Right, so it's probably across the spectrum on how they feel about it. Uh, yeah, you would rather be poor. You would rather the poor be poor, provided the rich were not as rich. Yep, that's basically true. I mean, the idea of egalitarianism doesn't imply that there has to be a certain standard of living or a certain lower rung of wealth. And in practice, that means you have to lower the standard of livings for everybody, and actually you have to lower them quite substantially. And of course, also destroy their autonomy and their freedom on top of it, right? It's not like you can do it and let everyone do their own thing. You have to have a plan, and you have to impose that plan on everybody. And so it takes away your purpose, your meaning, and makes you basically a slave of the state who lives less well than slaves in capitalism do, essentially. So uh, that is the necessary trade-off that they don't advertise, right? They make it sound like it's just going to be this wonderful check that comes in the mail and you're going to be wealthy, and that's not how it works. Um, so yeah, he does talk a lot about how progressive taxation and how it just doesn't work, how people move around it, and you can have you can set up any kind of government you want. This is one of the general themes of the book. If there's a great catastrophe, a plague, a war, a violent revolution, you'll get leveling. What happens though is eventually things stabilize. Once conditions stabilize, capital starts to accumulate unevenly, right? Because people have different inclinations, people have different aptitudes, people have different circumstances, and whatever the system is, people adapt to that. And you immediately start. I mean, we could wipe it to zero. Like say we had a genie and we said everyone has the exact same amount of money. Boom. Okay, that will last for one instant, and every instant after that, a disparity will appear. Now, in the first week, the first month, you're not going to have any billionaires or anything like that, but every unit of time that goes past, you're going to get some people who are going to become more and more wealthy. You're going to have other people who kind of stay where they are, and you're going to have some people who lose what wealth they have. You know, if you say everyone's got $1,000, you're the Andrew Yangs of the world, everyone's got $1,000. After a year, some people are probably going to be millionaires. Some people are going to have hundreds of thousands of dollars, and many people are going to have nothing. And so the problem is, as long as you have a standard system, that's going to continue, and you're going to get greater and greater inequality. And you can say, well, look at our system. The system, the way that's happening is because of capitalism and because of this and this. And so let's try and design a system that addresses those particular problems. So we'll put a high income tax and a high capital gains tax and whatnot. People will, whatever the system that you have, though, people will adapt to it. So a great counterexample here that I think a lot of people look at, if we're talking as a great counterpose to Western capitalism, people like to look at China. So you look at imperial China. It's like, well, they have some markets, but there's a lot of central planning, and the state has a lot of power, and the state is very meritocratic. You know, you have all these tests, you have to do really well on the tests, and it's run by these civil servant bureaucrats, and they're highly educated. They're the most educated people. I saw David Friedman talk about this. You know, to get into the imperial Chinese bureaucracy, at least in the Ming period, if not necessarily in the earlier periods. And the the idea of using tests to establish a bureaucracy goes back at least to the Song dynasty, if not the Tang dynasty. And about 1% of the people who took the test would pass the first. There are three levels to the test. There's the entry level, and the mid level, and the advanced level, or the national level. About 1% of people would pass each level. So you'd have 1% of people of everyone who took that entry level test, 1% would pass. Among that cohort of people, only 1% would pass to the second level, and then 1% to the top level. Okay, that means at that top level you're dealing with whatever that is, the one ten thousandth of the people who initially took the test, right? So super elite. Now, the tests were kind of silly. They had a lot of stuff about Confucianism and writing very stylized eight-legged essays about Mencius and all that kind of stuff. And Friedman actually talked about that quite a bit too. It was actually an interesting lecture he gave at PorcFest, where it's like it doesn't have to do with engineering or economics or science. It's about, you know, Confucian philosophy. The idea was, though, that in order to pass these tests, you would have to study them for many years. And be very good at them. And so the idea was that these are kind of like a proxy for an IQ test. In order to get to those top levels, you had to be very smart, at least at taking those tests. The other thing was that, well, you were basically getting indoctrinated. This material was all about the mandate of heaven, the authority of the emperor, the righteousness of the state, the virtue of the state, and the role of civil servants within that as functionaries to whatever, to make balance to the universe. And so for you to get to a high level of office, you would have had to have spent probably 20, 30 years indoctrinating yourself into that. So by the time you actually achieve some political power, you have been thoroughly educated into the ideology of the ruling elite. Fascinating idea. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you could say, well, this will be a perfect system because you're just picking people who are meritocratic, and you have a divine ruler who can't be elected or unelected, and he's not going to be corrupt because he's already wealthy, and then his business. But what started to happen is that system then people knew, hey, if you wanted to get rich, you could do merchants. That was a thing, but that wasn't open to most people. But the main thing is, well, if you could do well on the tests, you could get high position and you become appointed a governor, or even more, you could have a role in the imperial court, and then just that would give you status and wealth. And if you're corrupt, on top of that, even more so. So families would take their children and say, okay, our son is not going to work in the field. He's not going to have a job. He's not going to be an apprentice. We're going to have tutors, and he's going to study this 24/7 until when he's 20 or 30, he can take the first level test. And maybe by the time he's 50, whatever, he can get to the top level test, and then he'll be wealthy, and then he'll hire all of his friends and his family. And there were things that were supposed to prevent this, right? They weren't supposed to serve in the province where they were from. And we saw this. So most of the high-ranking civil servants, they were coming from the lower Yangtze River around Shanghai, because this was the wealthiest region, and these people were able to afford the enormous amount of investment that it required to get somebody to the point where they could pass these tests. The other thing you could do is become a eunuch. Right, so if you became a eunuch, you could serve in the bureaucracy and even in the imperial court. And some of these eunuchs, because of their personal influence over the emperor or other members of the court, became fabulously wealthy. So there was a infamous, famous one named Henshin, who ingratiated himself with, I think it was the Kangxi emperor and then his son. And, there's all these stories about how his wealth was, unbelievable, blah, blah, blah. So, you set up the system, and you could say, well, we were going to try and make it so that this doesn't happen. But whatever system you set up, as long as it's stable and as long as it doesn't change, people are going to adapt their habits, they're going to adjust, and they're going to do everything that they can to take advantage of that system to their mutual benefit. Not their mutual benefit, to their personal benefit. But yeah, so I've yet to be presented any kind of rubric of intellectuals as to the ideal level of equality. That is when you realize that they're ever moving goalposts of these people. Yeah, that's absolutely true. They're ever moving goalposts. They don't have an answer to that. It's very similar to the point this book reads. If you're going to say we need to address inequality, that this is a really important issue, well, then you have to be able to say what level of inequality are we going for. It's very similar to climate change. I say, okay, let's assume that climate change is a problem, and let's assume that humans are responsible for it. What's the temperature that we need to get to for this to be fixed? And you can't really get a straight answer on that. And even if you could, it would be, well, what do we need to do to achieve that? That you can't get a straight answer on. And so we become into this, well, this is basically a blank check to do anything at that point, because there is no specific quantitative or qualitative way to assess success. There just isn't. And the same thing with inequality. Are we looking there? I mean, there's absolute perfect equality of outcome, and I think there are people who do want that. I think that the rhetoric that a lot of the people these use would kind of imply that, right? These people are like, hey, you have more money than me, fuck you, you should give me half of it. Okay, well, regardless of what you've done or how you've saved or how you haven't saved or what skills you have or how you've, like, no, they're still going to be envious, and they're going to still, so they don't have an answer to that, which means they're basically just writing themselves a blank check for their smorgasbord of political projects, which I think is what's really happening. I think there is a genuine intuition. Like, I do think a lot of them do have an impulse, an egalitarian impulse. Egalitarianism is a natural impulse that a lot of people feel, but without having any kind of specific policy goal that can be articulated and that's reasonably possible, it's just a blank check to do anything, which is very similar to what we have going on with climate change. But absolute versus relative poverty. Humans are bad at understanding absolute measures, but relative poverty is an experience they live daily. That's true, but so let's say I'm not relatively poor compared to my peers, but and you could say, well, there's people who are fat, but I am relatively poor compared to Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or many other people, um, but it's interesting in the rhetoric though of these social justice warriors, the left today, they don't say, well, look at your neighbors. Your neighbors have a little bit more money than, aren't you jealous of them? They say, look at how this 1% who, if you're not in the 1%, if you're in the bottom 50%, you probably don't know the 1%. You probably don't go to the club with them or see them on this, right? I mean, in New York City, maybe you see them on the subway or something, but they're not really your peers. So why should you be jealous? Why are they invoking these distant elites who are in country clubs and on resorts and in high-rise buildings and urban centers that you've never been to, that you'll never meet, that you never care? They're never going to spit on you. They're never going to have you shine their shoes. The only interaction you're going to have with them is that you're going to patronize their business. They're going to provide you with something that you value, and you're going to provide them with an exchange for that. And it's hard to see how that's exploitative, and it's hard to see how that's even personal, right? When you go to Walmart, you don't actually see the Walton family sitting there, on a huge pile of money, even though like they could literally sit on a huge pile of money if they wanted to. You don't see that. You never see them. You don't even know what they look like. So, and yet they're going to get invoked. A lot of people are going to say, "Oh, look at them. They're wealthy. We need to tax them. We need to take their wealth." And then what? And that's the other problem is one of the problems with the progressive wealth redistribution policies. $1 billion in wealth taken to be redistributed does not mean poor people get $1 billion in their pocket. Even if they did, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't still be inequality, because if their habits don't change, those poor people are just going to spend that money and they're going to be right back where they were in a certain amount of time. But that's not even the case, because most of it's going to go into social welfare programs. And so most of that's going to be spent on what I call bureaucratic friction. It's going to go to the bureaucracy. It's going to go to middle class and upper middle class bureaucrats who have tenure, who can't get fired, basically, who don't do anything. There's going to be people who, a disproportionate number who live within the Beltway around DC, and then, of course, the regional centers, or in the places that get the grants in the various state capitals or whatnot. And those people are not the poor. Those are not the people who are suffering, and those people are not relatively, uh, you know, poor at all, and yet they're the ones who are going to get the increase, the wages, the salaries, the benefits, all that stuff. So yes, there's many, many, many problems with it. So it's a good book. I do recommend people check it out. Again, it's The Great Leveler, William Slidell. Oh, thanks, Visitor and Jim Jesus. I'm just now seeing that you guys sent money. Awesome. I appreciate it. Thanks. And for those of you who are just joining, who didn't see the beginning, because I am concerned about the channel getting erased by YouTube at some point, I have gone ahead and applied for the partner program, and I was accepted just today. But I still am very leery of YouTube, the way things have been going. So I have also started a podcast. So if you look in the description of this, you'll see the first episode of that podcast. I am not I mean, so far it's pretty simple. It's just one episode. There'll be more. I'll probably re-upload a lot of my videos on here, especially the older ones that I'll probably add commentary to. There's a lot in the first year or two that are 15-minute videos that have a lot of content that I would not word the same way or discuss in the same way that I would today. So a lot of that's going to get redone, I think. But the atmosphere is such that I think it makes sense. It behooves one to diversify one's platforms. So, I don't know if this is going to be the permanent setup of the podcast or whatnot, but for now, I had to start somewhere. I've been thinking about this for a long time. People have been encouraging me to do a podcast for a very long time. And I saw Ivan the Heathen's video about he's switching over to BitChute, and yeah, if you monetize your videos, the algorithm will promote your videos. That's another consideration. And again, I don't do this channel to make money. I have a day job. I don't need the money. It's nice to make it. I don't deny that, but like, it's not about I need this for my income. It's that it will promote it better and more people will watch. And it's a fine line, and I don't claim to walk it perfectly. I'm out here because I want to discuss these ideas and I want to have an audience. So it's good to have people listen and people who want to hear what you have to say. But on the other hand, you don't want to become a fucking whore for it. You don't want to be wedded to trying to get in views and trying to get in subscribers and do whatever it takes. There's something about that where you kind of can lose your virtue in that, and it's a fine line, and I'm not going to walk it perfectly. Nobody can, but I'm going to be as relaxed about it as I can. Oh, you're sub to the podcast. Yeah, and it's I'm working on getting it onto iTunes. It's not there yet. It's on Stitcher right now though, so it is there. Yeah, like it's a little bit. It's going to be like a little stipend, not much, but whatever. Uh, is there a way to archive your library? I'm sure that there is. I mean, a lot of the videos that are on my YouTube are on my laptop. A lot of them, several hundred. This is the second or third laptop that I've owned since I've made a YouTube channel, and some of my older laptops might have more videos. I don't know if they literally have them all. There are ways to take videos off of YouTube and save them, or at least more likely than that, I'll probably convert a lot of them into MP3 files, though. Duh, duh, duh. Let your light shine, matey. Oh, hey, how to Santa Flora? How are you doing? How's the UK? Are you ready for those elections? You're too far over on the not trying to get views side. Oh, just you wait. I have some tricks up my sleeve. It's also just interesting. I was just going over the numbers and looking over the foreskin circumcision stuff is really driving the channel at this point. That's accounting for most of the new views, and it's accounting for most of the new comments. It's accounting for most of the new subscribers. Most of the people who are reaching out to me are from that, and that is a topic that I'm really interested in. But I'm also interested in reaching out to that audience for the other political stuff, which was kind of the original idea when I first started the channel. I was going to reach out to gun owners and, hey, you're gun owners, you love liberty, here, become libertarians. I'm not going to preach, but I think libertarianism has a lot to offer to intactivism, and those two are riding. So elections are so cool. Yeah, I can't wait. Lengthy, do you have a Twitter? Uh, well, so the podcast did not exist until, I mean, I just uploaded the first one yesterday. I wanted to make sure that it worked and that other people could do it. I had some friends on here that I send it to make sure that it worked. As soon as I knew that it worked, I went ahead and did the live stream. So it's brand new. It just started yesterday. There's just one episode. I will get more out there. There's a lot of content that I can start systematically putting up there. So my hope is that within another week or two, there's actually several hours worth of stuff on there. And if I get my act together, there's no reason that I couldn't have quite a few hours of content on that, more than people are going to be able to listen to in the same amount of time. So that's kind of my goal there, including new content. Uh, Yes, the vast amount of wealth owned by the rich is in capital goods and productive sources. The oppression over income carries the false message that the rich are voracious consumers. Yeah, this is what sells. That's absolutely true, right? Most of the wealth of the wealthy is there to serve the masses. That's how they get wealthy in the first place. That's how they grow in their wealth. It is true that it may seem that they're conspicuous consumers because they have yachts and whatnot, but usually as a percentage of income, they are much more frugal than the average people, because it's poor people who spend 50% of their income on luxury goods, on fancy cars or jewelry or on alcohol or drugs or whatever. Right, so we say, well, they're poor, so just buying these things makes them poor. Yeah, but they're still spending it on luxury things that they don't need. Uh, I've worked with poor people most of the jobs that I've had. I used to work at a telemarketing center before I had this channel, and everybody on there was living paycheck to paycheck, and it was nuts because we got paid every Friday, and almost all those people, they get paid Friday. That money was cashed. Most of those people did not have bank accounts. They wouldn't save a penny. They would cash that money out. They go to the liquor store. They go to the cigarette store. And yeah, Friday and Saturday night would be party time. They'd be really open-handed. They'd be giving each other, oh, you want 20 bucks? You want 40 bucks? No big deal. No big deal. By Monday, all of them are broke every week. Now, it's true that they weren't making a ton, and many of them did have legitimate expenses. They might have had a couple kids. Maybe they, had a house payment, but no, they just wasted almost all of it. They consumed a huge portion of it, and people are going to say, oh, well, this is all the fault of the Waltons. No, it's not. And I mean, It also is interesting that it kind of robs them of their agency. It's like they're just helpless children. They have no control over themselves. They're not responsible. But the people who pay all the taxes, they are responsible. So, yeah. You should rebrand to just lengthy because it's your old name and a good description of your videos. I'm just going to keep the whole old name because that's what I'm known as. So, Jim Jesus, we need to talk finally. I'm done. I am officially home. It's been crazy the last week because I totaled my truck in an accident in Wyoming and I had to buy a new truck, which is ongoing. And then I have to do all the paperwork that goes with that. So there's been a lot going on, but I will have time to dedicate to podcasting slash YouTubing. So I'm not going to make this full time or anything, but it's going to be more regular, at least for the next couple months. My podcast is I did add it to iTunes, but it's in process, so that is ongoing. I just added it yesterday, and it takes a little while. And I mean, Stitcher happened, I think, almost instantaneously. iTunes, we'll see what happens. I'm hoping that this directs more people there, and it gets a little bit more hits than it normally would. So, uh, uh, yeah, most of when I was reading about how to start your own podcast, a lot of it was like, well, how do you get your first audience and whatever. And I think I'm kind of fortunate here that I already have some of an audience anyway, to start with. It's not just me, and no one's ever heard of me. I have a little bit of a brand and a little bit of an audience, so that's what I'm going to do. And like I said, well, those of you who want the salacious details here, I've actually recently had a couple. I had a couple guys who I was talking to who were like, well, we were basically having sex talk, and they're like, hey, give me a call and sex talk me. So I would sex talk them, and they'd be like, man, your voice, you could just do a podcast. And look, that's anecdotal and doesn't mean too much. Something I've heard for years though. So I was like, okay, this is finally time to do this. Um, will you have guests on your podcast, and will they be pretty much identical to your YouTube videos? So I do want to do more interviews with people. I don't want it to be an interview show per se, but there's lots of people that I would enjoy to talk to that I think would have interesting conversations. I think on this channel, I've only done one interview on this channel. I have been interviewed on other channels. Poe the person has interviewed me maybe twice, and a few other people. I'm always happen to do that. I think X Polidoc years ago interviewed me. So I'm happy to talk to people. Sometimes the more interesting videos come from that. I don't want to make it a dedicated interview show, but definitely do like talking to people and just having a dialogue. That's just more interesting a lot of the time. So there's definitely that. Other than in basic law, it will be very similar. Book reviews, current events, topics, and you can guess what topics those are going to be. Hit you up on Discord. I had to turn Discord off to start this going, so I have it on my computer somewhere. Let's see. I'm just checking. I'm not checking Grinder, guys. I have a steak in the oven, and when it hits 225, I'm going to eat it. So we got a ways still. Da, da, da. Okay, if I got you on the podcast, what would I interview you for? How about how I made you rich because I advocated that you buy fucking Bitcoin and you became wealthy. Thanks for the house. You're welcome. Jesus. All I got out of it was a chicken dinner. So yeah, I was happy that when I applied for the partner program on YouTube, it said that it could take months. It actually ended up taking like 2 days. Um, so I'm happy for that. We'll see. I haven't had it set up to run ads, but I probably will here. I don't see myself like taking advertisers, right? So it's never going to be, I'm never going to come on here and saying this brought to you by so and so. I just can't bring myself to do that. But if YouTube wants to run ads on there, that's a different story. I'm okay with that. So let's see. How to sand a floor? Isn't it like really late there? You should be in bed. You would all to me? Oh, well, prove it. you should you should redirect. You should put a link to my podcast in your most viewed video because I know you've got videos with like 1 million views about sanding floors. So, all right. Uh, YouTube wants to get rid of regular Joes on YouTube. I think that that is very likely correct, and part of me understands that. You know, they're running the servers; it's expensive. If the people aren't making the money, that makes sense to me. I think that they're also going to use it as a political tool to get rid of people they don't agree with, or that they find, cancelable or whatever. So, um, it is what it is. I believe in freedom of association, and if YouTube wants to cancel their terms with me or whatever, I think they have a right to do that. And I'm not going to say I have a right to their channel or a right to any of that. That doesn't mean I want them to do it either. So if there's something I can do that will make it more beneficial for them, then I will, within reason, right? I'm not going to become a shill, and I'm not going to do. There's lots of things I'm not going to do. But if joining the program and selling some ad revenue makes it worth their while, then that's fine with me. I have at least three people who tell me I owe them all because I got them into Bitcoin. Yeah, but isn't it true for me and not true for the other people? Uh, Maybe other people suggested it to you, but it was because you respected and listened to me that you got into it, right? I think that's what you told me. You're obligated. You're obligated. You owe me intellectual property for the idea of buying Bitcoin in 20 whatever that was, 2012. Duh. So yeah, that's a change. So I'm glad to hear that it works. If you want to look in the description, there's a link to the podcast. Again, the first episode is basically just why I'm doing a podcast, why I'm switching over to that. And yeah, YouTube wants to be online TV, and they're cozying up with the established networks. And what we're seeing here is an attempted ossification. We now have some established social media utilities, and they want to basically they're going to try and solidify their position. Now, there are things that they can do on their own to try and do that. They can try and form cartels. They can try and coordinate with each other. They can use they can use their data and whatnot to try and achieve that. That's not going to work as long as there's open entry. As long as there can be competition, they're never going to achieve monopolies or oligopolies. They're never going to be able to do that. The only way it's going to happen is if they can go to the government and the government can regulate them. And we have them basically explicitly calling for that. We have people saying this should be a utility, it's a right, social media, blah, blah, blah. And it's really kind of sophisticated the way that they're doing it, because they're saying, look at they're persecuting right wingers, they're persecuting Trump supporters, and so they're getting Republicans in Congress to be like, hey, let's go and regulate this. But the regulations always, always, always will be to restrict competition, to help the established firms, to the detriment of the choice and the wealth of the consumers. Now, they haven't achieved this yet. It's an open question whether they will or not, but they're certainly going to try. So, yeah. Sue them in objectivist court. Okay, the sauce. That's true. We had I don't know if any of you remember, that was way back in 2012, but I think in the end I was right. Posted a comment about something, and then the sauce wanted to do a video about it, but I did a video about it first, and he commented that I stole his idea and that he was going to sue me in objectivist court for 1 million Bitcoin or something like that. But we never it never went to trial. So statute of limitations is over on that. So let's see. So, and also I must apologize, right? So the podcast, and just like the YouTube has always been, is pretty bare bones. I'm not doing editing or very, very little. I try and just do, click and record, and when it's done, I don't do takes, I don't split cuts. I feel like not only is that a little disingenuous, kind of like photoshopping. Like you don't Photoshop your pics. People are going to find out eventually. And it helps you cheat. And also, it just takes way more time. Or you're spending you could spend 5 times as much effort to produce a product that it's a little bit more polished, but the content wise it's not any different. If your car runs a certain miles per hour, who cares if it's got dirt on the sides? So he's going to push for the death penalty. Come and get it, Molan Labe. So one of my subscribers, the one who's helped me a lot recently, was suggesting that I do a video on my libertarian t-shirts. So that might come up next very soon. That first video back, I did a whole talk on the Marv Heemeyer Killdozer thing, which I guess a lot of people weren't familiar with. So that might be coming up. If people have other ideas, I'm totally open. But there's a lot to cover, man. There's so many books to read. There's so much going on in the news. It's not hard to find content. It's just harder to find time, uh, and sometimes motivation. So let's see, 176. Going to push for the death penalty. All right, guys, so we're coming up 51 minutes here, so feel free to ask any questions if anyone has anything else they want to say, anything they want to know. Now's the time. I'll probably have this go for another 10, 12 minutes. So let's see. Da, da, da. When you are trying to keep attention, be succinct to convince people of what you are trying to say. You literally have to think about what you are saying, curate, and enhance. So, yes, that's true. I understand that. Uh, but I feel like if I have to like use bells and whistles to keep you to pay attention, what like I mean, I'm treating them like a dog for one thing. It's like you can't spend the time. I get it. I get it. It's this fine line, but like you're like a hot skip. You're a hop, skip, and a jumping away from saying we need 30-second sound bites to go onto the TV. And I don't. The way I the ideas I want to express and the way I want to express them don't really lend themselves to that very much. I suppose there's ways to do it, and there are YouTubers who have done that well. BitButter comes to mind. There's a few others. Liberty is Not Given did videos like that, and you can make a 4-minute video that covers an advanced topic, but you have to really curate it out, and also you have to compromise by, cutting out a lot of details and a lot of asides and tangents and stuff that's relevant that you kind of I want to make a strong argument, and that means I have to recognize all the counter arguments and include them in, and that makes that approach very difficult. And also, there's lots of things I could do, as everyone knows. I could make videos, the truth about this, and whatever happened in the news today, I can make a video about that, and make it and then I think that bothers me, like at an instinctive level. So I want to do a certain way, and if that means the audience is only a certain size, then so be it. I'm not going to be a whore who will do anything for that many more views. I'll do some stuff. And if there's marginal on the margins, I can do stuff that will help. I'll consider that, but I'm not going to change everything to make it into, well, let's see how many views I can get. I need a viral video, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah, the truth about this movie, the truth about what just happened yesterday in fuck that. And I've criticized Molyneux a lot, and I have a lot of problems with Molyneux, but you have to give him credit. Of all those, we had the YouTube anarchist, renaissance back in 2006, 7, 8. Most of those guys are not around anymore, and the few who make any content at all, Molyneux has become by far the most popular. I mean, I remember when he had like 1,000, 2,000 subscribers, and now he's arrived to an extent. But look what he's become, and as a result. Now, not to say he didn't have problems before. He always was a narcissist. He always had a god complex and whatnot. But he really corrupted himself an enormous amount to get that way. He really sacrificed virtue, and I don't want to do that. I just have no interest in doing that. And like I said, I'm not making money from this. I don't need to make money from this. I have a job. Yeah, Molyneux. you got to give him credit. I mean, like who starts out in their car and becomes like a YouTube philosopher? And he is a YouTube philosopher. He's a really shitty philosopher and is not very, like his ideas aren't necessarily very good. And he is kind of articulate as a good debater, but he's also like good debater in terms of like sounding good when he's talking to a moron. But so I give him credit for all that. But he blocked me on Twitter. Someone asked about Twitter, so I don't have a Twitter. I'm thinking about getting one just for the podcast, but we'll see. That's coming along. You don't look like you have a job. You look homeless. It's possible I didn't shower today. Sorry. With your donations, I will be able to get a budget for wardrobe and cosmetics. Come on. Have you read the book Markets Not Capitalism? No, I've heard of it, but I haven't read it. This was a big kind of semantic, I would say, largely debate among the early YouTube anarchists. You had a lot of people who were, I'm for free markets, I'm for market capitalism, but they weren't for capitalism. And some of this, I think, is just branding. Some of this is understanding that Marx is the guy who kind of coined capitalism, and like, why do we want to define ourselves by Marx? And I kind of agree with some of the semantics here, where you don't want to just say, well, anyone who has capital, we're for them, because that's not the case. I think if someone has a lot of capital and they make bad investments and they go bankrupt, that's awesome. I don't care. That's good, and that's a more market-based approach. But I think it's semantic quibbling that's not going to get you anywhere, right? The socialists are not going to go, oh, you're for markets, not capitalism, so I now support free markets and laissez-faire. That's not going to really work. Mm. Good night, Ben. Nice to talk to you. I look forward to when you give me all the Bitcoin that you owe me. He has an amazing ability to shoehorn any discussion into a lecture about spanking and single moms. Well, that's how he wins his debates, right? He attacks you and says, well, you were spanked, and that's why you don't agree with me. Who wrote Markets and Capitalism? You're saying it's super lazy. Now I have to know who you're insulting. Tom Woods, Tom Woods rarely has anyone promoting immigration on his show. I'm sure he has had people who are pro-immigration on his show. They just didn't talk about it. Um, you know, he has a successful show. I think Tom could be way more interesting than he is, uh, but I feel like he keeps the gloves on way too much. I like Tom Woods though. Don't get me wrong. But he's had Brian Kaplan on there before, and Brian Kaplan's pretty pro open immigration. Gary Charterley, or however you spell it. No, I don't know him. It's like an anthology. He keeps like very often they don't dig into he doesn't really debate them. He doesn't really debate the ideas necessarily. He plays devil advocate only to a small degree. And look, I really like his interviews. I listen to most of them, not all, and whatnot. And I think there's I feel like a lot of it he does kind of like a libertarianism 101, and he's way more advanced than that. He is not a 101 type guy. I don't know if it's because he does all this Liberty Classroom stuff, or if he thinks I want to have as wide appeal as possible, so we're not going to get really into the weeds on a lot of issues. Or it's also possible that it's just, hey, I've been exposed to this stuff a long time. I've read a lot of this stuff, and maybe it just seems boring to me because, it's very often a rehash of stuff that's already been done. I know I found that way. I felt that way about the Mises like YouTube. So I used to watch every single lecture that was on the Mises, and they have really good lectures, and there's some gems in there that are just amazing, especially some of the stuff like Robert Higgs has done. One of the ones when Napolitano spoke there 10 years ago was amazing. But now I find when I look at it, I'm like, okay, I get it. I don't need to see this. But Tom Woods is the respectable ANCAP. And maybe he's going for that you know, and so, okay, that makes sense within that context. Brian Kaplan was on there to defend his book on education, though. Yeah. Brian Sovereign says being a one-man podcast show makes the podcast more interesting. Well, it's not true because he says that necessarily. I'd be curious I don't know if that's true. It can become you get this kind of pseudo personalizing where you kind of think, oh, I know this person, I know their personality, and it becomes more personal, even though it's probably not because they probably don't know who you are. Um, so Benjamin Powell's lectures are also really great. Oh, that reminds me. So Ben Powell, I don't know if he's still at Suffolk University, but he used to be for a long time. But I have a guy that I know who was in his class who graduated from Suffolk, and I have known this guy for about 5 years. We hook up every so often. He's very, very submissive. He's a total slave. The first couple times I met him, he worked for the FDIC, and we kind of had little debates about government regulation. And I said, "Oh, I know a professor from Suffolk, Ben Powell." And he goes, "Oh yeah, I know him." Well, so he came home for Thanksgiving because he now lives in DC. We hooked up again, and he works for the Fed. So I'm hoping to drill him for some more information in the near future. So we'll see. But yeah, this goes into the whole gay network thing where one of my slaves works for the Fed. So, there you go. Um, duh, duh, duh. Ben Powell was great at PorcFest when I saw him. He was actually kind of very pivotal in my view of Molyneux. You can find this video online, but Molyneux was on a panel about whether libertarianism should use utilitarianism or deontology in terms of advocacy. And Ben Powell asked the panel, what role utilitarianism had, and Molyneux said it has no role at all, that you should never invoke utilitarianism. Unless you're talking about immigration, apparently. This was probably back in like 2013 or 14, though. He works for the Fed. He works in banking. How interested are you in linguistics? I'm somewhat interested in it. I learn languages. I'm still learning Icelandic. I've been doing that for years, but I'm slowly making progress on it. But it's very much like hobby learning. Ben Powell has a podcast. Yes, here's one of the problems is that libertarianism can kind of be broken down into a couple of little sound bites, and it kind of got popularized with NAP, a few things like that, and you had a lot of people, and I think Molyneux was responsible for a lot of this, of getting a lot of people like, oh yeah, I agree with that, but they didn't really have very sophisticated answers, and so they could be kind of their ideology wasn't that deep or that well thought out because they'd kind of gone off of slogans, which is what most people do anyway, right? That's what leftists do. That's what Republicans do. Most people don't go into the weeds. How many socialists or leftists have read Marx or gone really into Kropotkin or Howard Zinn or whatnot? Not that many. So Olin never talks about UPB, guns in the room, or defooing unless other people bring it up, and he just does it so he doesn't have to admit that he was wrong, but then contradicts it in his other shows. Yeah. Do you still watch Molyneux? It's just that's I can't really do it. I don't know when's the last time I watched a Molyneux video. It might have been over a year ago. I'm still subscribed, and I'll see that he's got videos, and I just don't watch them. But I've also just don't watch as many YouTube videos as I used to. There was a time like in 2008 where I watched every video in my subscription list pretty much. and then that's slowly degraded to like I probably don't even watch 1% of them now. How consistently do you work out these days? So now that when I'm out in Montana, I could not work out at all. There was no gym I could get to in the time I had between shifts, so no working out at all. Now that I'm home, my routine is going to be jujitsu 6 days a week. It's going to be gym probably 7 days a week, 5 days of lifting. The other 2 days will be just stretching and walking. I don't know if you already answered this, but how did you manage to read 23 books in one summer? It was pretty easy because I was in the middle of nowhere in Montana and there was nothing to do. Obviously, I was working, but the way my work is, about a third of the days that I'm there are actually quite busy and I don't have much time to do anything. And about a third of the other days, I have probably 6 or 7 hours a day that are free. And about one third of the days, I have the entire day free. Now, I can't leave, I can't go to town, I can't go sightseeing, but I'm in a on an oil rig, 65 miles from the nearest town. I brought a lot of books. I just made a point to read books, and if I was cooking or eating, to listen to audiobooks. And I just didn't watch very much TV or spend a lot of time on the internet. It was also easy because I had very limited internet access. So when I was in my office, we obviously had internet there because we had to be in communication with the oil company. But when I was not in the office, which was half the day, I didn't have any internet access. So this has kind of been a normal feature of my work, and I anticipated that happening. So I actually brought about 30 books, and I was hoping I would finish all of them, but I, only finished 22 or 23. Do you go to Planet Fitness? No, Planet Fitness is terrible. Nobody should go to Planet Fitness unless they literally have no other choice. Planet Fitness, actually, their headquarters are in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. That's where they started. They are not a gym. They say so in their advertising. They are basically marketing to people who are fitness signaling. There's virtue signaling where you pretend to be whatever nice, but you don't actually be nice. Planet Fitness is if you want to pretend to be fit and pretend to be happy, but you do, or, and healthy, but you don't really want to go through the effort. And I've talked to guys, gay guys who have worked at Planet Fitness as managers. I've joined a Planet Fitness before, like when I was traveling and there wasn't another gym available. And I remember when I did that, they said at this gym, after the 1st of February, 85% of the people who sign up in January will never go again. And among the 15% who do continue to go, many of them might only go until March or maybe only once a month or something like that. So the entire business model, it's a very smart business model. I think that they understood this is going to go to a huge rant. I could probably make a whole video just about Planet Fitness. But they understand that for every person who is very dedicated and serious about getting in shape and wants to be strong and whatever, that there are a much larger number of people, perhaps 100 people or more, who they like the idea of being fit. They want to do something, but they're not that dedicated to really follow through with it. Well, the problem is that that first type of person who's really dedicated, who's really going to be, progressive overload, really pushing, he's going to be doing deadlifts and squats and all that, running real hard, sweating, grunting, blah, blah, blah. And presumably, if they continue doing that, they're going to get fit. Because they're fit and because they're working hard and exerting themselves, they can be intimidating to a lot of the people who are in the secondary category who would like to be fit but don't really want to put in that much of the effort. And so those people can be intimidated by that. And so that's why Planet Fitness kind of, it's a judgment-free zone, and they have the lunk alarm. If you grunt too much, they'll tell you to stop. They'll ring the alarm. But if you're fat, they'll give you Tootsie Rolls and pizza. So it's really smart marketing. They get you in with a very cheap rate because they know that most people are not going to go for very long. So yes, it's $10 a month or maybe $20 if you get the black card. But if you only go for 1 or 2 months, it's not really cheap. You're spending $120 or $240 a year for maybe 1 or 2 or 3 months. The other thing is they just don't have a lot of the stuff that you need. They discourage the heavy compound lifts, so most of them don't have squat racks and deadlifts. Someone's going to comment and say they went to one that has one. Sure, maybe. I've been to several that they don't. I've talked to people, they don't have them at most places. Their benches, their dumbbells, they usually don't go over 50 pounds. It's about machines. The machines are vastly inferior for most fitness goals. They're better than nothing, obviously. If you're going to Planet Fitness and doing the circuits, that's certainly better than if you sit at home and do nothing. But they're not very effective. They're just simpler and easier for people who are intimidated and who don't want to learn the technique of actually doing it properly. So they're also way too fucking woke, right? So if you go and you grunt because you're doing a deadlift, they will tell you to calm down. If you're a transsexual man with a penis and you go into the women's locker room, they'll be like, you're fine. And if anyone complains, they'll get rid of them. So it's smart marketing, but it's basically fitness virtue signaling. And I don't think people should go. Now, it's very cheap and they're often open 24/7. And if you don't have a choice or you're a student, that's the best that you can do. Fair enough. But that's only until you can find a real gym, which again, they say they are not a gym. They say it's not a gym, it's Planet Fitness. So yes, and I'm somewhat passionate about that, so I should probably make a video about it. Also, they don't have communal showers, so that's just totally out of the question. Um, duh, 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 duh. That's a lot. Do you have lifting goals you are shooting for? So my goals are not, I don't have specific weights that I'm going for at this point. I do practice progressive overload. I record all my workouts. I know how much I can lift at any given time. So my goal is to reach 75 to 85% of my lean mass potential, which would be something like maybe 4 years of bulk, good bulk. Um, so, and then get to 10 to 12% body fat. And then I'm happy with that physique. And then on top of that, I'm talking about flexibility, physical skills, that sort of thing, not muscle skills or whatever, maybe strength a little bit. Um, so those are my goals. Now to achieve those goals, it's diet and it's progressive. It's tracking your workouts and, knowing what you're doing and doing it. So at my age and where I'm at, I think five lifts a week is good. And then the other times are I'll go more than that. I'll go to the gym even if I don't lift, just to stretch and work out, do a little cardio. I love to walk. I think walking is one of the healthiest things you can do if you've got the time. It's a good time to listen to audiobooks, listen to lengthy or podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever. And it's also one of the healthiest things you can do. It's obviously not going to give you a great physique necessarily, but it's excellent cardio. So, what's your reading speed? Do you subvocalize when you read? So my reading speed varies a lot depending on what I'm reading. Some stuff are real page turners and I can do over 100 pages of small type a day. And others, it's like if I can do 10 pages a day, it's hard. So it really varies tremendously. This summer, I was shooting for 100 pages a day and I managed that on average. Some days were more, some days were less. But that was my goal then. And that average held pretty well through most types of books. Some of the books that I read, like the Henry Adams book, had smaller type and smaller pages. You can go a lot faster. Some of the other ones, like the say the book on ancient Rome, the history of later Roman Empire, was much harder to read. It was harder to read 30 or 50 pages a day on that book, so that's why. I have an 8-hour live stream when I went through the whole book. Yeah, I actually listened to your 8-hour live stream, Jim Jesus. It took 2 days, and I did it when I was doing my geological descriptions. I would listen to your podcast on that. This Planet Fitness rant reminds me of your old video, Football, the Sport of Fools. We could do a whole other video on football because that was before we really knew so much about all the concussions and everything. And I do have strong feelings about football, but they're more mixed now, because I do think that people joining teams and being on teams and participating in sports is a good thing. I think that it's something that people should do, and I just don't think football is the best choice for most people because it will fuck up your brain. So I mean, you could do like flag football, or you could do something without pads. That's probably actually way better. Uh, so. Oh my God, you record all your workouts. When do we get to see? I record them I write them down. I don't video record them. They only have Smith machines. Yes, so Smith machines are smart marketing. They're popular. People love them, but they're better than nothing, right? It's important to say if the alternative is not doing anything and going to Planet Fitness and doing Smith machines, well, that going to Planet Fitness and doing Smith machines is way better than not doing anything. It's also vastly inferior to using a bar or a dumbbell, or some cables can be really effective for this and this. And also doing progressive overload, tracking your workouts, really pushing yourself, working in the correct rep range, not just going and doing a low weight for 50 reps and being like, like, again, that's better than nothing, but that's suboptimal. If you're going to go, right, if you're going to spend an hour at the gym, then it makes sense to spend that hour doing something that's going to be effective and productive. Um, and it can be to get the absolute most effective, that could be difficult, but to get in the top, the 80% effective, you want to get that. And if you're doing Smith machines, you're talking about like 30-40% effective. All right, Jim Jesus, talk to you later, and let's figure out when we can do something together on whatever, so we can finally talk after years and years of not talking. uh, I love to swim, I do it all year. Yep. Any chance of getting Ivan on the podcast? Ivan's been on the podcast twice, and I think there's a good chance of that. I just have to talk to him, and we just have to have a topic to cover. Uh, I'm such a slow reader, but I have so many distractions. So I would recommend, if that's the case, and this is a problem I struggle with as well, get rid of your phone. If you're going to read, take your phone and put it someplace else. Uh, that really helped in the summer when I'm on the oil rig, because I just did not have internet, so my phone is not going to go off. It is much more difficult to do it at home because it's much easier to get distracted. Uh, I also think it kind of helps to give yourself like a pile. Like, okay, these are the books I want to read, and put it in a place, not on a shelf where it's kind of daunting you. And when I was on the oil rig, I created a pile of books that I brought and a pile of books that I'd finished. And I was like, how many of these can I do? And I was trying to do them all. I failed, but I did most of them. Did you know that Stoicism is the unofficial philosophy of the military, the Canadian military? Maybe. So, where's the shirt review? It hasn't happened yet, Jared. And yeah, I didn't say I was going to do it in this one. I said I'd do it in a future one. Why are the machines ineffective? So I'm going to be drawing this from two authors. Mike Matthews, whose book Bigger, Leaner, Stronger, I found the most effective practical guide to getting in shape. A New York Times bestseller. You can go online. You can buy it for $10. And he is drawing a lot of his from Mark Rippetoe. So Mark Rippetoe is one of the main guys to have popularized barbell training and dumbbell training, CrossFit being kind of the other. There's actually a really good interview from 2017 between Tom Woods and Mark Rippetoe, because Mark Rippetoe is actually quite a strong libertarian, although he is understated about it. But the problem with Smith machines is, because it's a machine, you don't have full range of motion. The way Rippetoe says it is, with a bar, you can fall down. If you have a barbell on your back, or that you're lifting or picking up over your body, there's a chance that the bar can fall, and so you need to, or that you could lose your balance, and so you have to use many, many more muscles, stabilizing muscles, ancillary muscles, your back, whatever, to keep the bar from falling. If it's in a machine and it's locked in place, that's not as much of a problem. You are utilizing some muscles, but far fewer. And then the other thing is the range of motion problem. If you've got a restricted range of motion, there's actually a higher chance of getting an injury. I found that on a Smith machine, I've tried doing lifts on Smith machines, and it freaks the fuck out of me, because it's on those rails, and it's in this restricted range of motion. And if you try and keep it and your angle is slightly off, you can really fuck up your shoulders or your chest or whatever. So um, it's definitely far less effective. Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. Stabilizer muscles don't get activated. Uh, Higher range, because it teaches bad form. Yep. You look very different than you did in your old videos. Did you get cosmetic surgery? No, I've never had surgery. I got older, right? So those first videos, 2011, I was 28. Now I'm 36, and my face melted off in 2014. I was in a really bad accident in 2014, and my face was burned off in a oil field accident, which there's a video about that if you want to watch. And then slightly after that in 2015, I lost 60 pounds. So I've physically changed a decent amount since I started these videos. I was younger and fatter, and my face hadn't been burned off. So that's it. I've never had any surgery though, other than the circumcision. Also, I grew a beard. I didn't have a beard in the early days, so that's also changed. I definitely look different. If I go back and look at those old videos, I'm like, oh God, oh, it's terrible. What was I doing? Because you see, I had fat cheeks, the whole 9 yards. Do you read 100 pages in one sitting? No, well, that can happen if the book's short or has the right kind of text. No, that would typically be in multiple sittings. Just go ahead and upload. Just take the very first video, which is about gun control from February 2011. Would you recommend melting your face off for older women who hate wrinkles? So when it happened, and it wasn't my whole face, it was the lower half of my face. I was wearing safety glasses like this. So this part was okay, but my nose got really badly burned, like third-degree burns on my nose, third-degree burns here on my lips. My lips got very badly burned. And then all of this in my ears and my neck, and I was wearing a V-neck. All of this got mostly really bad first, but also second and third degree burns. There's heavy blistering in lots of spots in my ears. So all of this got burned really bad, and it all died and fell off, and it looked like I had leprosy for about a week. And then when it came back, it was like pink and new. And one of my subscribers said, "Well, this is actually a therapy. People do they don't use fire; they chemically burn it off, and the people pay a lot of money to do it. So apparently, it's a thing." I've been watching you for like a decade, and you've amassed a change. Good work, man. Well, it's been eight. It's almost been 9 years. No, it's almost. Yeah, it's almost been 9 years. It hasn't quite been a decade yet, and there have been massive changes. Like I said, I lost a lot of weight. I put on muscle, which I didn't have any before, and I grew a beard. So I've matured well. Kamala the cop is out. So people are saying they're attributing this to Tulsi Gabbard. I hope it's true. Kamala Harris is, of course, one of the worst ones, but you almost want, you have mixed feelings because you almost want a politician who everyone hates. You don't want somebody who's super suave. So like Obama was a quote good politician, right? He was very charismatic, and people said he was articulate. That's debatable, but he could hold an audience. He had a gravitas, and he seemed reasonable, and he presented himself in a respectful way, and he walked this fine line of he kind of appealed to the radicals. He still does, but he really wasn't. If you're talking like, is he a Jimmy Dore progressive, SJW? He had kind of rhetorically put himself there, but he really wasn't. He really, governed as a centrist, and he was horrible, right? He killed tens of thousands of people. He got away with a lot of really fucked up, nasty shit, and it would have been better if people hated his guts. And so somebody like Kamala Harris is like, people hate her guts. She's a bitch. It's the same with Hillary Clinton. She's just, people fucking hate her. If she had been elected, it would have been really bad, but there would have been so much resistance to her that it would have been good. And somebody who, a Jack Kennedy or these people who, oh, they're so, they have, Obama was really bad because he did have like a cult going on. There was an identity cult with Obama that's still going on. That's really bad. So Harris, obviously a hypocritical bitch and a horrible person and a piece of shit and awful in every way, and she's wrong on every issue, and she just falls into that Lindsey Graham, Hillary Clinton. She's just bad about everything. but yet she's unlikable. So I almost prefer her to be president than somebody who is, charismatic and has really high social skills. Like again, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is very, very good liar. He's very good at gaining your trust and knowing who you are, and which we talked about when I met you in Seattle. And you could say, oh, he's a good politician, and then you could also say that makes him fucking dangerous, right? So, whereas the more overtly power hungry ones, it's easier to like question them and to resist them. So, duh, duh, duh. My face is way thinner. Yeah, I had fat cheeks, dude. My body fat when I first started working out, which was I joined a gym for the first time on December 22nd, 2014. I remember the date. That's the day that I first walked into a gym, and they did a health assessment, and the body fat content. And again, the meters they use are not perfect, so like this isn't exactly correct, but based on like pictures of myself at the time, I think this is roughly, I was about at over a third body fat. I was like 35, 36% body fat. And that was probably the range I was in for all of my 20s. And now I'm not super lean right now. I got down to probably 11 or 12% at the end of 2015. Right now I'm probably more like 15%. So that's a big difference though. It's 15% versus 35%. That's a huge difference in how you feel and how you look. What kind of work were you doing in the earlier videos? So I started working in the oil field in 2008. So I had been doing oil field for 2 years before I started doing YouTube channels. The reason I was able to afford a camera to do YouTube videos was because I had paid off my student loans. I had paid off, a vehicle and credit cards, and that was because I had been working in the oil field for 2 years. So I have not had any other. That's been the only work that I've done the entire time I've had this channel. Is there any Democrat that could oppose Trump? Seems like a weak year. Well, yeah, I think Bernie definitely could. Now, Bernie is an old socialist and he has lots of problems, but he appeals in the right states, right? He has a wide appeal in Michigan. He's a wide appeal in Ohio. And he has a rhetorical device against Trump. I fucking hate Bernie Sanders, and I think he's full of shit, and I think he's a hypocrite, and I have a very negative opinion of him. But I think that it's very likely that if he had been the candidate in 2016, that he would have had a better odds than Hillary Clinton did, just because of his appeal. Like he's still going to win California, he's still going to win New York, he's going to win all those states, but in a lot of those Rust Belt states, I think he had a better shot. He's also not as bad on some of the other like triggery social justice warrior things. So he's not really that bad on guns, right? He's not a gun grabber in the same way that, say, Hillary Clinton is or most other Democrats. He's not that bad on the trans issues. He's not bad. So, yes, he's a socialist. And yes, that's a dead letter for a lot of people. But those are the same people who were any Democrat they were a dead letter for. So I actually think that Bernie Sanders is one of the best people to go against Trump. Do you believe Bernie is a closeted commie? He has the honeymoon in Soviet Union. Yeah, he went to Yaroslavl, and you can find all these videos of him praising how great Russia is, and it's blah blah blah, and then then Trump is the Russian agent. Although to be fair, Bernie hasn't been as big onto the whole RussiaGate thing as other people were. So yes, I do believe he's a communist. There's no question he's a communist, and this whole democratic socialism is just a rebranding of communism. There is no functional difference as far as I'm concerned. I think he believes in nationalization. I think he believes in the state taking over. And he believes in cradle to grave. And he fucking, there's videos of him praising food lines, and saying that there shouldn't be so many types of nylons and lipstick. There should only be one type that everyone gets, and blah blah blah. So he's definitely a communist. He's definitely an apologist for the Soviet Union. So there's communists, and then there's even worse, people who apologize for the Soviet Union, of which he and the New York Times are both guilty of that. And so, yeah, I think he's actually abysmal. Now, he doesn't have some of the problems of the ruling elite centrists, right? He doesn't have the necessarily as bad a foreign policy, U.S. imperialism as say Hillary Clinton, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, George Bush. he supports the wars. He's not very good on those issues, but he's not as bad as the consensus centrists are. Um, so he's also more honest than say a Warren. Warren is such a double dealing, two talking snake. You know, not just lying about Pocahontas. The fact that she'll say, "Well, I'm going to have this $54 trillion program, but your taxes aren't going to go up," whereas Bernie will say, "Oh yeah, your taxes are going to go up." He's going to, and at least you give him credit for being honest as far as that goes, instead of I'm going to give you stuff for free and it's not going to cost anything, which is what Warren's trying to sell. Uh, Voting for the libertarian voting is lesser of two evils, still evils. Yes. Yeah, you don't need 18 types of. He's a communist. He I think he's sincere in that he wants to like help people. He really thinks like, well, the government is it's better if everything's planned, and if the government plans everything and the government take care of everybody. You know, when he was in Yaroslavl, he's talking about the government putting on puppet shows, right? So the government should run entertainment, you know, and the idea that what do you think? They're not going to have, they're going to have entertainment that's going to not flatter the state? Come on. But that kind of stuff doesn't occur to them. So there is a movement in the Libertarian Party, right? I've been following this stuff. The Mises Caucus is trying to get more active, and they're trying to get basically more principled libertarians instead of these Republican light, right? So there's lots of good things you can see about somebody like Gary Johnson and Bob Barr, but they were not very good doctrinaire libertarians, and they couldn't express. And sure, that's not necessarily a mark against them, and they're definitely better than your average Republican or your average Democrat. But what's the purpose of the ticket? If the purpose of the ticket is to advance the libertarian cause, I think you need somebody who can articulate very well the libertarian position on as many topics as possible. And it's been a while since we've had somebody like that. I think Michael Badnarik could do that in 2004. And then, of course, Harry Browne in 2000 and 1996. Harry Browne, especially, was very good at it. Um, but these other guys, they're there, but they're not really spreading the ideas. And at this point, I think that's all they can really hope for. And as long as we're nominating people like Bill Weld or Gary Johnson, we're not going to have that. Now, the other question is, well, is that really good? Because you don't want to have a libertarian that spoils the election for a Republican. And I say, well, in general, there isn't a dime's worth of difference between the Republican and the Democrat. However, if that really bothers you, well, then still vote for the Republican. That's fine. But in the meantime, if the libertarian candidate can give a good lecture tour on libertarianism and get libertarianism ideas out there, then that's good. So hopefully that happens. Uh, I mean, there's also a problem in the Libertarian Party is you've got these. There's this term that the Mises people, I think the Mises people coined. It's the Beltway Libertarians. This is the Cato crowd and the Nick Sarwarks of the world. And look, I have a lot of gay libertarian friends in Washington, and some of them are hardcore anarcho-capitalists, and they're all the way down plumb line. They wouldn't disagree with a single thing that I've said. And a lot of them have really cushy jobs working for Cato or whatever, and they are woke motherfuckers. And some of those people have the most advanced stages of Trump derangement system you've ever seen. I've been to, I mean, the last time I was in DC, I was in a gay pool party on top of a skyscraper or a apartment building in DC, and the venom against Trump for but for Trump, like, no, Trump should be impeached and he's a war criminal, but like so is Obama, so is Clinton, so is Bush. The idea that he's substantially worse is completely cosmetic. And yet that's how they feel. They're very, very woke. And you have somebody like Nick Sarwark and all this talk about, oh, you have to sign a pledge that you're not a racist. And dude, it's fucking revolting and sickening. And Sarwark is a tool. I mean, he's a pork fest and he's just a piece of shit. The C4SS, what is that's the Center for Stateless Society, the Market Anarchists. So they're very much left libertarians, and they're always well represented at PorcFest. There's the whole they call it the Alt Expo, the Left Libertarian Expo, and I also feel like we kind of agree on everything, but then there's a difference in emphasis, or you know, or it's like maybe they've changed. Maybe they're a bunch of bleeding hearts now. I don't know. They've always just struck me as left libertarians and people who want to say, well, they don't want to go out of their way to apologize for capitalists, which is fine. I don't want to go out of my way to apologize for capitalists, right? I'm not for bailouts or that kind of stuff. But it becomes a question of like, well, what are you actually advocating? You're saying that we should confiscate their wealth or that we should have socialism, and they're not advocating that. So I don't know what the difference is, right? Why way back in the day, I made a video on left libertarianism, and one of those guys who he lives here in Manchester, he's a free stater, he made like a 2.5 hour reply to me that I never watched. So, uh, yeah. Okay, C4SS, Center for a Stateless Society, people really hate hierarchies, but they hate them, but are they going to destroy them with the power of the state? That's the question, right? I really hate lots of things that I'm not going to legislate against, right? I hate Planet Fitness. I'm not going to outlaw it. I hate shower stalls. I'm not going to outlaw those. And I love communal showers, and I'm not going to make them mandatory. I hate circumcision, and I think I would ban that if I could, but that's different topic. So, um, are they going to ban hierarchy? And I think the answer to that is no. They might advocate against it. They might say it's bad or you should try and avoid it. But I don't think that they're going to actually use legislation, in which case I don't really care. I mean, they can say that it's bad and they want to try and organize their own kibbutzim that are equal or whatever. That's totally cool. They can do that. As long as they're not going out and stopping other people. I do think a lot of that anti-hierarchy stuff is just wrong. People just they don't value it that much. They rather put in their 9 hours and not have to worry about everything else, right? They want to defer to some authority so that they don't have to spend their whole life worrying about everything. I think so. I think that that's so. Kevin Carson guy doesn't think there should be billionaires. I think he is the most status of this. But okay, doesn't think there should be. There's two ways you could meet, two things you could mean by that. You could say, well, without the state and without its intervention in the economy, there wouldn't be billionaires, right? And that's very debatable. I think that there would be billionaires, but there may be fewer. Um, uh, Markets tend to change, and there tends to be a lot of turnover in terms of wealth, and without the state there to subsidize fortunes tend to come and go, but that is not a guarantee that there wouldn't be billionaires. But you could argue there might be fewer, and they might not be quite as big a billionaire. You know, look at somebody like Bill Gates. Like, where would he be without copyright? You know, where would he be without intellectual property and the state? You know, it's a good question. Uh, but if he means it in the sense, but you could, I guess, you could make a good faith argument that you think that without the government there, they just wouldn't be billionaires. Then there's the well, why billionaire, right? So someone can be a 999 millionaire but not a billionaire. What's the cutoff, right? Because a 999 millionaire is, from my perspective, no different than a guy who's worth $10 billion. Um, you know, people debate this about Trump because he claims he's worth tens of billions or whatever, and other people think, well, really, Sam Harris would make this point. He's probably only worth 250 million, as if that is some huge revelatory difference. But the other thing is, so he hates them, fair enough, and maybe is he saying that they should not be allowed, that they should have all wealth over $1 billion confiscated? And that just won't work. People will just find a way around that. I don't think there's a single billionaire without IP laws. Maybe. I think that there would be. I do think that some people are very high functioning, and even when you're high functioning, that doesn't guarantee it. But say you work very hard, and then you're just in the right circumstances, right? You just happen to own the right property where there's the right oil rig, or have the right invention that becomes really popular, and you have a first to market, right? Even if you don't have intellectual property, that doesn't mean you couldn't do it. I do think intellectual property is very important to most. but not so much that you could preclude it never happening. But who cares? I mean, I'm not sold on the idea that it's that bad. So what? Someone becomes a billionaire. If there's no state, what the fuck are they going to do? They're going to take over. They're going to bribe every single defense agency or whatever. It doesn't make sense. Like, uh, I don't really hate hierarchies, and I just again that goes. Jordan Peterson makes that point really well. Lobsters have hierarchies. Hierarchies are just a thing. And they're impossible to get away with. And left libertarians have them. See, if we have a center for the stateless society has a meeting and Kevin Carson's there, he's not like equal to everybody else in any meaningful sense. Rockefeller wasn't Rockefeller a billionaire adjusted for inflation? No, Rockefeller was a billionaire just in absolute dollar terms. He is the first billionaire to actually have literally $1 billion, and this was in like around the turn of the century. So I think in adjusted dollars, it was more like 150 billion or something like that. Uh, so yeah, he was the first true billionaire, like actual had $1 billion, or at least in terms of assets. So, uh, Kunkin believes employer-employee relationships are moral, as well as any organization. I don't think that they're immoral. Um, there's a kernel there that there's an argument to be made. So consent is really a vital concept, but it's also a very hazy concept in certain regards. So, you know, if you're if you're an employee and your boss is like, "Hey, do you want to go on a date?" Uh, and you say yes, did you consent? Did they there wasn't an actual threat made, and maybe there wasn't even an implied threat, but just the fact that they're your boss, you know. So I think the problem is that people could talk about power dynamics. Well, that's a real thing, right? Let's say that it wasn't your boss. Let's say you're walking on the street and there's just a bigger, stronger man or whatever, um, and they ask you to go on a date. Are you going to more likely to say yes than if he's weaker and he can, right? So there's a line I think where it crosses where you're like, okay, we're getting into coercion territory, or the ability to consent is limited here because of the situation or context. Lengthy lobster meme now. Hey, you posted. I'll put it on my new podcast. So, uh, do you believe in free will? Good question. Like, to the extent that free will relies on something being acausal, I don't think it can exist. But there might be other ways of framing the issue. That's my weasel answer. Oh, all right, guys. My beef is almost done, so I'm gonna have to call this quits. So thanks everyone for watching and for commenting. Thanks for visitor for $5. I appreciate it, and I hope you all have a good night. All right. Oh wait. All right, guys.